Jackson, the older I get.
Makes you rich. And if they found
The fountain of youth, I wouldn't drink a drop, and that's the truth.
funny how it feels, I'm just getting to my best years yet. The older I get, the fewer friends I have.
I just hug him up anyhow.
But you don't need a lot, the ones that you got always got your back. And the older I get,
I will ask the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to grace us with prayers.
Good morning, members. Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of the Cabinet, ex officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. May the Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honorable Speaker of messages and announcements.
Honorable members, I rise to address two matters that was or gave rise yesterday in yesterday's sitting of the House. A matter was being raised by the member for Bordentown West when he was rightly stopped. It had to do with a breach of Standing Orders 73, subsection 4. I note that the report was not laid. I want to call on the chair of the Public Accounts Committee to say whether the matter is one of confidentiality and whether any member of the PAC has been given consent or otherwise for a disclosure. I'm expecting a response from the chairman.
Mr. Speaker, it would have been nice to have been given notice. And I can say that the document that you are referring to, the committee did not give any member permission to disclose it. However, there are underlying constitutional issues with which the PAC is not happy. And the PAC has, in fact, given notice that we will be dealing with the matter in the very near future. At this point, Mr. Speaker, I am not prepared to say any more.
Did I understand the member correctly that no permission was given? I do rule, however, the premature disclosure can give rise to contempt of this honorable House. As the member has said, he didn't know, but really he should have known, and the chairman should have advised him accordingly. And in saying he didn't know...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, you cannot make the assumption that I was aware of what the member was going to do. I was not aware of what the member was going to do. In fact, I signaled the member not to proceed what he was doing and stopped it.
Honorable member, we don't know what took place in our absence or took place not in front of us.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect, sir, that did not take place in anybody's absence. That took place on the floor of this assembly.
You didn't give me a
Members across the hall
honorable member,
can
sit down.
confirm that
Honorable
I
member,
turned-
sit
I'm
down.
making a point.
Sit down, or else you see the door. You didn't give me a chance to finish. While we don't know what happened in our absence or behind our backs or in the committee, we do know what took place here yesterday. That's the point I'm making. And I recognize that the member did apologize to the House. And so we accepted that apology. However, members ought to know their standing orders, and standing orders do relate to it. I think it's Standing Order 73. Subsection 4. The proceedings of and the evidence taken before any select committee and any documents presented thereto and decisions of such a committee shall not be published by any member thereof or by any other person until after the committee has presented its report to the House. I want to say to new members particularly, read your standing orders. On top of ours, standing order, Erskine Mays. Erskine Mays relates to it. And Erskine Mays reads on page 259 and pages 838. It speaks to the severe punishment for breach of trust. Bear in mind what the chair has said. There is a tendency by members to disregard this chair. For whatever their reasons, you do it at a risk. I bear in mind that the members knew, that the member said he didn't know, and I bear in mind that he apologized. Whether anyone wants to say they didn't know, I'm not blind Bartimaeus. And I yesterday spoke of what I saw was a strategy. The second point I want to raise is the matter raised by the member for Newlands. Because of what the member for Newlands did yesterday, it constitutes a breach of Standing Order 35-4. Standing Order 35-4. No member shall impute improper motives to another member. And bearing in mind, while it was ordered to be struck from the records, it was published live. Accordingly, I will remind the member of the standing orders, and I will remind the member of Erskine May. Most importantly, I want to remind members in particular those who keep breaching these standing orders and keeps and to berate and carry on outside of the House and thinks that that is the end of it. Well, it's not. Our immunities and privileges law states that these orders shall not be breached. 1. 2, that given what members said and know they ought to know, and the members who have done it so far, I'm only dealing with one aspect of it at this point, and that is what took place here yesterday, should not do so because the member is not a new member. He has been here his second term and ought to understand the standing orders. And standing orders, But the matter is not resting here. There has to be an apology made. Next item.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and reports.
None.
Questions to honorable ministers and members of the cabinet. The elected member for Bontown West to ask the honorable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands. Question number 9.
The member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 9, standing in my name. Can the Honourable Minister state the cost spent at all public schools, primary, secondary, tertiary, on security, the number of security personnel used, whether employed or contracted, and of that amount, the number that are Caymanian? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the honourable member for the question. The answer: government schools, the total cost spent on security services for government primary schools, high schools, and further education centres, SIFAC, is $899,483.25 for the term 2017 to 2018 academic year. A total of 40 security personnel are providing services in our schools. Of that number, 8 are Caymanian. University College of the Cayman Islands, known as UCCI, there are 2 security officers contracted to the University College of the Cayman Islands. Both are non-Caymanian. UCCI contracted these services at a cost of $162,432 for a period of 2 years.
Are there any supplementaries? If there are no supplementaries, I think we should suspend the relevant standing order.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to suspend the relevant standing order in order that the questions may be asked of ministers after the hour of 11 o'clock.
The question is that Standing Order 23-7 be suspended in order to carry on questions after the hour. All those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I had moved past supplementaries.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the honourable ex officio member responsible for the portfolio of the civil service. Question number 10.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question number 10, standing in my name. Can the Honourable Deputy Governor, ex officio member, say whether there will be any job losses in the merger of Immigration and Labour Department to create work?
The honourable ex officio member responsible for the portfolio of the civil service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the elected member from Georgetown Central for the question. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration is leading the establishment of the Department of Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman, also known as WORK. The team working on this project are on course to have the work agency become functional as of January 1st, 2019, when work will supersede the NWDA and portions of the current Department of Immigration in a multi-year implementation program. No redundancies are planned, In fact, the talent management aspects of the work implementation program are being carried out in accordance with civil service HR legislation, practices, and conventions, with frequent communications with staff through one-on-one meetings, group meetings, emails, and dedicated newsletters. As new business processes are being designed, streamlined, and automated, some job functions that are currently being performed in a manual manner will increasingly be superseded by automation. With regard to those employees whose functions are being superseded with automated solutions, they will be upskilled and retained in order to participate in other areas of work. Staff within the existing NWDA and Department of Immigration have been asked to complete resumes and are being invited to submit expressions of interest for posts within work, some of which are new and significantly different than their current role, while other posts have been revised to better align with the organizational objectives of work. Staff also have the opportunity to apply for promotional opportunities outside of work across the civil service and indeed the wider public service. The interim director of work is regularly meeting with employees on an individual basis to ensure that employees are informed of the change processes and can seize opportunities that are being presented by the formation of work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementaries, the elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. The acting deputy governor has suggested in her answer to my question the comment that says no redundancies are planned. Does that mean there is a potential chance that there could be redundancies? And the reason I ask that, Mr. Speaker, is the people, the Caymanians who work in these departments need to have the level of comfort that a decision of merger by the government, that their jobs are not at risk. So to leave it ambiguous as not planned does not give that security.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, the honorable elected member from Georgetown Central is getting into some hypotheticals here. But what I can say is that every opportunity is being provided to retain persons. There are no planned redundancies. There will also be opportunities for individuals to be able to participate in new jobs that are being created, and as individuals have choice, they may elect to work elsewhere across the civil service or indeed the wider public service. They retain the opportunity to elect where they work, but every opportunity is being provided, the jobs are there, and training is being provided for persons to be able to continue to work with what is now going to be the new work department.
Honorable member from Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the ex officio member for her kind response. Can the member say, I know the public is well aware of a similar merger with that same department, but also rather than with labor, be with customs. Is it going to be similar circumstances there?
Honorable member, can you answer that? Sounds to me that is far off from the original question.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the member can confirm, the acting deputy governor can confirm that as a result of work, the creation of work, that NWDA has now been made redundant.
Member?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer to the original response, which states that the work agency will become functional on January 1st, 2019. At that time, the functions of what we now know to be NWDA will be absorbed into work alongside other aspects of the work department that the mandate that they are seeking to fulfill. So this is going to be rolled up into work, just as aspects of immigration are being rolled up into work. So come January 1st, 2019, when work is established, they will assume those responsibilities that are currently being delivered by NWDA, along with a wider mandate to ensure that we have a functional response to managing the broader issues of ensuring Caymanian employment is maximized within this country. And significant strides have been made, and the staff have been kept informed throughout this process through the many ways that I've previously discussed. Thank you.
The member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I got exactly the answer needed, which is that one is going to subsume the other. Why then is NWDA required to complete resumes and submit them for jobs when it's the work of government merging departments? And certainly the rule of thumb is that no department form, be it authorities or others, that the creation thereof and moving across, no civil servant should be any less off than they were in their current jobs. Why is it that they have to submit resumes to get a job over there?
Honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for East End for his question. I again refer to the original response, which states that they are being invited to complete resumes and submit expressions of interest for posts within work, some of which are new and significantly different than their current role. There are new opportunities being presented with the formation of work, and persons are being asked to submit their resumes, which will provide an opportunity for the department to not only know what they used to do in their old jobs, but also what further qualifications they may hold that will be relevant to new opportunities that are arising. So in the formation of work, they are being asked to submit their expressions of interest so that they get first opportunity of being considered for these new posts. Thank you.
The member from
Thank you,
East End.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have all been here long enough to know that we have transferred people from one department to the other. Here we are, trying to make it more efficient, but there is that lingering possibility that those people do not qualify within this new environment, and then they have to go across the breadth of the civil service to look a job. Mr. Speaker, sir, with all due respect, I need to ask whether it's the Premier or the Deputy Leader to specifically look into this, because that can be nothing short of demoralizing the staff. So I ask them to please look into this thing.
Honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to be clear, and I think, the statement was succinct and was pointed to the question. There are no planned redundancies, but there are new opportunities to be considered, as there are new opportunities arising with the formation of a new Department of Work. It is not as simple as just doing what they used to do, or there would be no point in creating a new department. The department has a wider mandate, and with that wider mandate comes new job descriptions and new opportunities. But there is a commitment from the civil service to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to be accommodated, but they retain their voice and their ability to elect and to indicate where their aspirations lie. That is a part of the change management process, a very important part, and one which I have to give credit to the department and the ministries that have been working on this so closely, that they've been paying keen attention to. So we understand that this change management process will create some concerns and some difficulties, but every opportunity is being made to provide clear communications during this process, but also to maximize the opportunity for existing staff to benefit from the new positions which are being created. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I hear and I appreciate that.
Member from East End.
But the statement went on to say, which is what I was concentrating on, the statement went on to say, staff also have the opportunity to apply for promotional options outside of work across the civil service and indeed the wider public service. Apply. They have to go out on their own and now apply. Or go home. If they want to, go home. That's what you're saying, Mr. Premier?
Honorable member, can you say any more than you have already said?
They go apply.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, I have listened to what the honorable member for East End has had to say, but I'm not sure that I found a question in his remarks. Is there a question that I have not already addressed?
Mr. Speaker, my question is, why is it that the civil servants are not, if they're not suited for the new positions, why is it that they are not, positions are not found for them elsewhere in the civil service? Why is it that they have to now go and apply, not because of their doing, but because government is making their jobs redundant? That their department, quote unquote, merge, through the merger, is making it redundant. And if they do not qualify there, why is it that they have to go out and now apply for jobs across the civil service when it is common practice that the civil service finds positions for those they want to get rid of a particular department?
Honorable member, hasn't that been answered? I think that question has been answered.
Mr. Chairman, Speaker, I shall, if they don't want to answer, it's fine, that's fine, I don't have a problem if they feel it has been answered.
But the question has been answered. The member, I think that information is on the floor of the House. It's in the records now, so.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker,
you can't say that the member don't want to answer. You can't say that.
It's unfair to those who now have to go and apply across the civil service to try and find a job to survive.
Are you asking a question? No. It's unfair, honorable member, for you to say that the lady member don't want to answer, because she has answered your queries. She has. So I don't want to hear that the member don't want to answer, because that's not fair to her. The member from Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the ex officio member for trying to be as clear as possible in the understanding of this. I know it is not easy to merge two major companies, but obviously some people will have some concerns, which leads me to my next question, Mr. Speaker. Has there been any difficulties within this merger from an HR perspective or concerns? And I'm assuming based on what you've said, this is how you're dealing with it, but has there been any worries, like the fact of if I don't if I am not qualified to do some of those positions that are going to be available in the new department, what will then that person do? I think what the member from East End was trying to say is, well, if they don't apply because they can't qualify somewhere else, will the civil service then automatically find somewhere else for them to go if they can't qualify for somewhere else? Because we don't want any Caymanians without work. So has there been any difficulties? And lastly, and I'll sit down after this, Mr. Speaker, is I had the pleasure to speak to the Honourable Premier, indicating that the next question, which is quite much related to this, I don't want to step out of the boundary, but if the question isn't going to him, is there indications that the ex officio member will answer it, because it's the same thing but dealing with monies of the merger? So maybe I might ask a supplementary question now if the Premier has no intentions of answering it, because he indicated it's not in his name or his responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, maybe I can help the member and some other members of the House, because it is now becoming routine for questions which relate to matters well without my constitutional remit to be submitted to me. It's like it's a default position. If you can't find anybody else to ask the Premier. But, Mr. Speaker, Section 55, yeah, I guess it comes with the job. Section 55 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would read so that perhaps members will have a better idea of where the responsibilities are. Section 55(1) of the Constitution deals with the special responsibilities of the governor. There are various functions of the governor which have been delegated to the deputy governor. The governor shall be responsible for the conduct, subject to this Constitution and any other law, of any business of the government with respect to the following matters: defense, external affairs, subject to subsections 3 and 4, internal security, including the police, without prejudice to Section 58. And this is the relevant bit, Mr. Speaker. The appointment, including the appointment on promotion or transfer, appointment on contract, and appointment to act in an office of any person to any public office, the suspension, termination of employment, dismissal, or retirement of any public officer, or taking of disciplinary action in respect of such an officer, the application to any public officer of the terms or conditions of employment of the public service, including salary scales, allowances, leave, passages, and pensions, for which financial provision has been made, and the organization of the public service to the extent that it does not involve new financial provision. So, Mr. Speaker, what I was indicating to the member from Georgetown Central is that despite the fact that the question is wrongly directed to me, it would be answered by the acting deputy governor.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the honourable member could tell us, or if she's, whether or not she's in a position to state how many jobs or positions are going to be affected or superseded by automation, if she's able to answer that at this point.
Honorable Member.
I crave your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, just for a moment.
Mr. Speaker, just a matter of clarity, my question that I asked earlier still wasn't answered because it was a two-part series. So I just don't want the ex-officio member to forget. Thank you.
I thought the member had answered that question, and I thought that was what the Premier was just outlining. I thought that's where that came from.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to the question posed, I can say that there is not a definite number identified as yet, as the business processes are still being developed and indeed will be an ongoing process to evaluate. There are some positions that are immediately known because they deal with the receipt, for example, of applications. And if we were to move towards an automated online submission process, those would be positions that we could immediately anticipate would be impacted. I can say that approximately half of such positions are in anticipation of this move on temporary contracts. These are not permanently filled positions, and training is already being identified and positions identified for the persons who we know that are in positions dealing with the receipt of applications, which could provide itself as being the first opportunity to automate by providing e-services. Those things will still have to be processed and supported in the background, but the business process of how we receive them today would change. So we do not have a finite number. We expect that that process would be iterative as the work is established, but there is a commitment to upskilling staff to make sure that they can take advantage of the opportunities. And as I've said, the civil service is the largest employer. Opportunities abound beyond that one department. Thank you.
The member from Newlands, you have a supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. As far as the automation and moving business processes, some online, I'm assuming, how involved is the e-government steering group in that whole process?
Honorable member, the question is job losses in the merger of immigration and labor departments.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and then later on it talks about automation and making jobs, changing jobs to online and so on. So I'm assuming that that would involve e-government.
Honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. I can confirm that the person heading our e-government initiative is a part of the steering committee and is part of the considerations for the working group and how the automation would be approached. So there is an integrated approach, just as the portfolio of the civil service will advise on HR matters. The e-government entity is able to advise on e-services.
I'll allow one more supplementary, and the member from Georgetown Central had caught my eye. The member from Georgetown Central. That's you, yes?
Sorry, I thought you meant one more and me.
Say that, I said one more, and you had caught my eye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I still see that you got a little bit of love left for me. Mr. Speaker, I just want to clarify a matter. I do agree with the Premier in respect to what he was saying about was in his remit. Hence the reason I was just trying to help the process from the next question, that if in fact that my next question will be voided because it went to the wrong direction, I could easily address the matter in the next question with supplementary.
Really? Are you asking a question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I think I just better off go straight to the question then. Can you say, can the ex officio member say how they intend to rectify the salary differences between the immigration and labor in the merger? And has there been any difficulties with the merger from an HR perspective?
Sorry. Are you asking question 11? I see a white flag waving. I don't know if that means surrender or seeking pity. But, honorable member, are you asking a supplementary? Because yes. I said it was the last supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary question was there any difficulties in respect to persons from an HR perspective in this merger so far? Has there been employees who are upset and concerned and they can't find a solution? And how have you been dealing with that?
I thought so. Giving the honorable member responsible for the civil service some time, but I think, honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, without seeking to get into individual HR situations, which really I'm sure members would agree if it were their personal matters they wouldn't want to have aired on the floor of the House. What I can say is that generally we expect that any change management process, there will be concerns. And this is anticipated in the way that the communication process has been designed. It has included, as I've said, numerous ways of keeping staff informed, including regular staff meetings, and there is a dedicated newsletter that goes to staff apprising them of the progress that's being made and addressing concerns as they are expressed. And beyond that, there have been offers that have been stated, an open door policy for one-on-one sit-downs all the way up to the top with the interim director of work to address any concerns that individual members of staff may have. Now, I cannot claim to have a list of what those concerns are. I don't think this would be the place to raise them, but every opportunity is there to have open conversations with teams and on a one-on-one basis in anticipation that this would be a crucial part of the change management process for forming this new entity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
although I announced that it would be the last, I don't want the opposition to say that they didn't have enough time, and therefore, and still the member being a young member in this House, will give him that opportunity. The elected member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that one of the biggest issues is really communication, and I think my question to the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor is, in terms of the communication plan, would it just be easier to just, I guess, just agree to just submit to the House an undertaking in terms of what the communication plan is to staff? I know it's an issue in terms where a lot of staff have concerns. They are going to the representatives, so it'd be easier for us to be on the same page in terms of communicating the same information. What we don't want is a lot of bits and pieces of information going all around where it's actually affecting people's lives. I think that's probably the easiest thing, is just to put the communication plan out there.
Honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, if I understood the question correctly, it was a request for us to share with members of this honorable House an overview of the communications plan and strategy for how it is we're keeping members apprised. We are supportive of that. This is information that could be requested in the norm. So we are happy to provide that, including recent examples of the communications that have gone to staff in the form of a newsletter, which would include the various opportunities staff have to be able to address any concerns that they have on a one-on-one basis with members of the leadership team. So we are happy to share that with this honorable members of this honorable House.
That was the last supplementary.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honorable Premier, Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs, question number 11.
Honourable member from Bordentown, Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to ask the question in my name, number 11. Can the Honourable Minister say, how does his ministry intend to rectify the salary difference between the Immigration and Labour and Immigration and Customs staff once the merger of the two departments are completed?
Mr. Speaker,
Premier.
I think my attempt to direct the member and the House more broadly to the provisions of Section 55 of the Constitution and the special responsibilities of the governor, which includes the civil service, was completely lost on the member. The question should be directed to the acting deputy governor.
The member for the portfolio of the civil service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration has established the Department of Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman, also known as WORK. The establishment of WORK involves organizational change implications for the National Workforce Development Agency, NWDA, and those components of the Immigration Department responsible for the administration of work permits, permanent residency, and Cayman status. At the same time, the government has sanctioned the merger of the Customs Department and Immigration Department to create a single border management agency that will officially be known as Customs and Border Control, or CBC. The establishment of CBC involves organizational change implications for the Customs Department and those components of the Immigration Department responsible for the administration of border control matters, including entry and landing, visas, and asylum. Each change program is being managed by a steering committee. The steering committee for the establishment of work includes senior staff from the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, the Department of Immigration, the portfolio of the Civil Service, and the interim director of work. The steering committee for the establishment of CBC is co-chaired by the acting chief immigration officer and the collector of customs, who is the CBC director designate. Both steering committees are overseeing the delivery of work by project subcommittees comprising a cross-section of staff from the respective entities who are contributing significant institutional knowledge, experience, and insight to guide the change process in both instances. Matters of salary are amongst the key change management considerations being addressed with respect to the establishment of both organizations, work and CBC. In both instances, human resource professionals are undertaking reviews of the organizational structures, job descriptions, and connected matters, including compensation. Job descriptions for both organizations are being developed or revised as necessary to create alignment between roles, responsibilities, remuneration, and organizational objectives. In turn, the new job descriptions are being submitted to the portfolio of the Civil Service for evaluation in the normal course of action. Accordingly, the portfolio of the Civil Service has been actively assessing the new job descriptions and establishing the relevant salary bands for posts within work and CBC. This process is expected to be completed by or before 31st of March 2019, and when completed will result in refined clarity and rationalization of roles, responsibilities, and remuneration across both organizations. Notably, the bulk of frontline and middle management roles within the CBC will reflect close similarities to existing posts under the Customs Department and Immigration Department, and there is also close alignment in the remuneration of those roles. Where remuneration discrepancies are identified within one of the organizations or in comparison of similar posts between the two organizations, the objective is to create harmonization in pay grades without disenfranchising affected staff members. In regard to work, many roles are entirely new or significantly different from those within the NWDA and Department of Immigration. For this reason, staff from across both departments are actively expressing interest in roles based on evaluated job descriptions and will ultimately transition into those new roles based on a combination of skills, experience, and qualifications with targeted talent management support programs to promote continuous professional development. Again, this process will not result in salary reduction for staff transitioning into new roles within work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next item.
Statements by the honorable ministers and members of the cabinet.
I have received 2 statements, and I call now on the Honorable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the last several months, the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture, and Housing has been extremely busy, and I'm pleased to take this opportunity to update this Honorable House on the advancements made in our subject areas. In the matter of health, Mr. Speaker, we have taken key decisions and begun the implementation of projects that going forward will shape the future of physical and mental health care of all persons within our islands including those aged 65 and over. Mr. Speaker, we commenced a 60-day consultation period on the 1st of August for the proposed healthcare decisions bill, which speaks to the decisions that patients and their families must make surrounding the sensitive topic of end-of-life care and treatment. We are now seeking the public's input on the bill, which has been uploaded on the ministry's website, along with the press release and the frequently asked questions guide. Mr. Speaker, the Chief Officer and the ministry's team have also appeared in the media speaking about the proposed legislation and the importance of making those decisions in advance. It is important to gain public input and wide consensus, and I want to encourage the public to take some time to review the bill and provide their comments to us by the 30th of September. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take the time and say a few words about the reason we believe this legislation is so important. At the annual health conference 3 years ago, at the end of the session on the same subject, stakeholders expressed the need to develop appropriate legislation and guidelines. They felt this would allow medical professionals and family members to uphold patients' express preferences about their treatment and end-of-life decisions. As fellow members of this Honorable House will be aware, Mr. Speaker, we currently have no such legislation in place. As a result, healthcare providers face many difficulties with families and caregivers of patients who are unable to make decisions for themselves or whose preference for treatment cannot be honored. The bill is the outcome of substantial work over the last 16 months by the team within my ministry and by a committee chaired by a chief officer comprised of relevant healthcare stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, a second piece of legislation that has completed its 60-day consultation and recently received approval by Cabinet is the Human Tissue Donation and Transplant Regulations. The Human Tissue Transplant Law, passed in 2013, came into force on the 31st of July, 2018. Subsequently, Mr. Speaker, the Human Tissue Transplant Council was established and appointed by Cabinet. This council will monitor the donation of tissue by living persons and the removal of tissue from deceased persons. It will also regulate the collection and use of human tissue for medical, commercial, and incidental or connected purposes. This council will establish the first organ donor registry in the Cayman Islands. Members of the public have advised me that they are very pleased with the coming into force of the Human Tissue and Transplant Law and the Human Tissue Donation and Transplant Regulations, as this will allow the Cayman Islands joining an overseas donation network whereby our patients will gain priority on international registries. Mr. Speaker, while I am on the subject of legislation, I must mention that the ministry has commenced a review and update of the public health law. This law is outdated and does not address areas such as food safety, air quality, barber shops, and public health emergencies of international concern, to name a few. The associated regulations are outdated, and in several sections, regulations had to yet be developed. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, the committee established and known as the Public Health Legislation Review Committee was appointed. It is chaired by the ministry and includes representatives from various agencies, such as the Department of Environmental Health, the Public Health Department, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Commerce and Investment, the Water Authority Cayman, private and public sector medical practitioners, as well as laypersons. Mr. Speaker, since its first meeting on the 31st of July, the committee has held weekly meetings with lots of enthusiasm as persons agree that this review is long overdue and necessary to bring the Cayman Islands in line with regional and international best practices. Based on the proposed work plan, this work is expected to be completed in 2020. Mr. Speaker, I turn next to the area of mental health, which we can all attest is every bit as important as physical well-being. You may know that a few months back, we received planning approval for the long-term residential mental health facility. This development will allow Caymanians in need of long-term mental health care to finally be able to receive treatment within our shores. As I mentioned at the last sitting of this Honorable House, we received approval from Central Tenders Committee to pre-qualify the successful bidders for construction of this much-needed facility. Since then, during last month, we received approval for the building permit application from the Building Control Unit. The tender period for submission of bids to construct this facility is closing soon and will be followed by a review of submissions and a recommendation to the Central Procurement Committee for a contract award. The construction of the facility is expected to commence this fall, and we look forward to moving this much-needed project forward to its completion. Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to report that we have been able to make progress on another demographic with unique concerns in the area of health, namely our population of some 4,000 persons aged 65 and over. My honorable colleagues may be aware that the Department of Health, Regulatory Service, and the Health Insurance Commission have been working with an actuarial firm to investigate the feasibility of the Cayman Islands introducing a health insurance plan that targets specific needs of seniors. Mr. Speaker, this work included a public consultation with all stakeholders on the subject, which took place in this past March and April. In addition, a 22-question survey sought to gauge general public opinion on the need for such specialized plan and was available online and in print. I am pleased to say that we received some close to 900 responses from the community and very high-quality information from healthcare providers and insurance vendors. Mr. Speaker, the consultants will return in mid-September to discuss the interim report that will be used to determine a suitable schedule of benefits for the local environment. It will also produce an actuarial determined health insurance premium rate for persons aged 65 and older. A final report is expected later this year, which will be made public. With this information in hand, the Cayman Islands government should be able to take the best informed decision possible on how we can provide current and future seniors with cost-effective and cost-efficient health care that affords them the best possible quality of life. Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to note, whilst on the topic of older persons, that my team at the Ministry is actively involved in the implementation of the National Older Persons Policy as it relates specifically to our respective subject areas. Mr. Speaker, I would like to also inform this honorable House that I've given instructions to also work on the possibility of offering free health care for all of the children of this Cayman Islands. Families are burdened with the additional cost to ensure that it's mandatory by law that their children be covered. And we as a government, we've been sent here to look at ways and means that we can come up with to ease the burden on the people of this country. And we have a responsibility to do so. We'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank all the members of the Public Health Legislation Review Committee, the Human Tissue Transplant Regulation Review Committee, and the Healthcare Decisions Bill Committee for their hard work and dedication to the work of their respective mandates. Another committee that I would like to make members aware of, Mr. Speaker, is the newly formed Aedes aegypti Eradication Advisory Board. Members will be aware of the sterling efforts by the Mosquito Research and Control Unit team to control the nuisance biting and disease vector mosquitoes on all three of our islands. The Aedes aegypti is one of the most efficient disease vectors and is responsible for the transmission of a number of viruses, including dengue fever, yellow fever, chikungunya, and the Zika virus. As a result, it represents a significant public health threat, and as we found out, the Zika outbreak and its impact on our tourism sector, a potential economic threat as well. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to advise that the Director of MRCU, the ably Dr. James McNally, has assembled an advisory panel of local and international experts to provide advice on the development and implementation of a viable Aedes aegypti eradication plan that includes sound scientific metrics and practices. In addition to the MRCU's director, the board's other members include Dr. Keith Altman, who is the Director of Research in the School of Professions in the University of Texas Health in San Antonio. And she's also affiliated with the Gates Foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation. Dr. Roberto Barrera is the lead of the entomology and ecology team at the Dengue Branch Center for Disease Control and Prevention in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Dr. J. Lyle Clark III, and CEO of Clark and affiliated companies, a global environmental products and service company. Dr. Ari Faraji is an executive director and entomologist in the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District. Dr. Ari is also Vice President of the American Mosquito Control Association. Mr. Will Penu, the CEO of the Cayman Islands and Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Valeska Stempluik, who is the advisor in health surveillance, prevention, and control of the Pan American Health Organization. Dr. Samuel Williams Rodriguez is the acting medical officer and chief officer of the Health Services Authority, and Mr. Joel Vectorine, the Environmental Health Officer, Department of Health. Mr. Speaker, while the goal of eradication of Aedes aegypti in the Cayman Islands is an ambitious one, I believe that the hard-working team at MRCU, working with the benefit of the oversight and advice from this knowledgeable board, will be able to deliver on this. Mr. Speaker, I want to advise the Honourable House that I actually attended the first meeting they had a week ago I was very impressed with the amount of information that received and with the amount of expertise that is on this board. Mr. Speaker, we will make great strides towards eradication. And I stand to be corrected, Mr. Speaker, but I believe this is the first committee, international committee, assembled to eradicate a mosquito. Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to report to this honourable House that my ministry took steps recently to ensure that the Department of Environmental Health had the necessary leadership augmentation it needed to surmount operational setbacks on the solid waste section. The augmented leadership has led to the improved service position and an improved application of performance management. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, I would like to formally thank the Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, and the Chief Officer of the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, and the Department of Vehicle and Equipment Services and the Public Works Department for so graciously allowing the respective secondment of the interim acting director, Mr. Richard Sims, and interim acting assistant director of solid waste, Mr. Mark Bothwell. We'd also like to thank Mr. Randall for all that he's been doing, who's also from this department. Keeping in touch with health threats and their mitigation, Mr. Speaker, it's vital. To that end, I am pleased to report that the laboratory of the Department of Environmental Health organized a 2-day training session on Legionellosis risk management for building water systems on July 16 to the 7th, 2018. 18 environmental health professionals from both the DEH and the Water Authority Cayman took part in the training session. Mr. Speaker, tourism-associated Legionnaire's disease refers to an instance where a country has shown up in the travel history of a visitor who has been diagnosed with Legionnaire's disease upon their return home. Mr. Speaker, here in the Cayman Islands, once the presence of the Legionella bacteria is suspected, the case will be referred to the DEH for testing and recommendation. Outbreaks and sporadic cases have occurred in buildings such as hotels, hospitals, nursing homes, and cruise ships around the world. Although cases have been rarely linked to the Cayman Islands, the DH has begun to take the necessary steps to ensure that the Cayman Islands have the ability to reduce the risk of properly assess and remediate against Legionella should the need arise. And finally, in the area of environmental health, I am pleased to report that negotiations with the preferred bidder for the ISWIMS project are continuing under the Senior Project Manager with the support of Major Projects Office, Chief Project Manager. Progress is being made on the various legal, technical, and financial reserve matters. Mr. Speaker, once an agreed position in these reserve matters has been achieved, it will be captured in a draft contract that will be submitted to the Central Procurement Committee for the review and approval. We are anticipating that this will occur in the first quarter of 2019, followed by a final contract being submitted and approved once the EIA and planning approval processes are completed. We are projecting that this should occur in mid-2019. Mr. Speaker, turning now to the subject of environment. Mr. Speaker, as you know, Grand Cayman is suffering from an explosive population increase of the invasive green iguana, which now approximately 1.1 million are now threatening to reach approximately 4.6 million by 2020 unless massive control measures are implemented. This alien invasive species is causing serious social, economic, and environmental damage affecting homeowners, tourism facilities, businesses, farmers, the natural ecosystems, and endangered species. Control of this green iguana population is challenging because it is a rapidly increasing population, and if culling measures do not exceed the rate of population increase, they will fail to prevent problems getting worse. I am pleased to report, Mr. Speaker, that the government is in high gear in trying to solve this vexing problem once and for all with a system that works for all, one that is fair and not costly. I want to thank all the persons and companies who have been culling iguanas over the years, filling that necessary gap whilst the government finds a suitable way forward and flexible options. One dog. Mr. Speaker, one of the most topical global matters at present is that of the detrimental effects of plastic waste is causing to both terrestrial and aquatic environments and to the life forms inhabiting each. On my message for the June 8th World Ocean Day, I focused on the theme preventing plastic pollution and encouraging solutions for a healthy ocean. Close to this important day, Mr. Speaker, the National Trust for the Cayman Islands, along with children from the Cayman Prep High School, Cayman International School, Hope Academy, Northside's Edna Moyle Primary, St. Ignatius, Montessori by the Sea, presented me with their signed letters petitioning for promoting plastic-free concepts in the hopes of protecting our beautiful islands and surrounding waters. Mr. Speaker, it is heartening to see children taking an active interest in preserving the environment for the future generations to come. I am pleased to report that my ministry's policy team is currently underway with research and shall be briefing me shortly to review use of plastic designed for single use only, such as grocery bags, plates, cups, and cutlery in our islands, and the potential alternatives which exist of these. Mr. Speaker, I want to go on to say that whenever you have children interested in a subject matter, we as a government should do all possible to ensure that the children recognize that they also have a voice. Mr. Speaker, another topical concern for islands now is the excessive sargassum seaweed on our shores. The issue of sargassum washing up on Cayman shores has been ongoing for many years, mainly during the 2-month summer window, but usually only in small, very manageable quantities, and mostly on the eastern and southern shores. However, in more recent years, sargassum has been coming up ashore in larger and larger quantities over an extended summer window, approximately 4 months now. And sometimes it makes landfall on our northern and western shores, not just the usual eastern and southern shores. Mr. Speaker, pelagic sargassum is a brown algae or seaweed that floats free in the ocean and never attaches to the ocean floor. These free-floating forms are only found in the Atlantic Ocean. Sargassum provides refuge for migratory species and is an essential habitat for some 120 species of fish and more than 120 species of invertebrates. It is an important nursery habitat that provides shelter and food for endangered species such as sea turtles and for commercially imported species of fish such as tunas. I am pleased to note, Mr. Speaker, that the Department of Environment has developed a formal sargassum task force, which met for the first time on June the 29th, 2018. The task force discussed the influx of sargassum on Cayman's beaches and waterways and will serve to determine the roles of various agencies, including protocols for sargassum cleanups and approval processes. Other agencies are the Recreation Parks and Cemetery Unit, the Department of Tourism, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Planning. The task force has begun to work to establish those protocols and disseminate accurate information regarding sargassum as its removal from properties around the island, including formalizing expedited process for gaining planning's approval for sargassum clearing by mechanical means, investigating and formulating a process for creating a list of pre-approved contractors, which will be based on a list of approved equipment for clearing sargassum from beaches, identifying a suitable composting disposal area for sargassum, creating a sargassum poster for tourism and hospitality industries, creating an informative fact sheet for tourism visitors, and exploring the fertilizer capability of sargassum in Cayman. I am also heartened, Mr. Speaker, to note once again that our youth have their finger on the pulse of these topical issues, as the ministry recently had a science project presented by the grade 6 students at First Baptist Christian School on the subject of sargassum. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that caught my eye was a sargassum boat. Now, most of the technocrats seem to only want to clean it up once it arrives on the shore. But I'm in the opinion, just like Mexico, that we need to mitigate it with possibly purchasing a sargassum boat and also having mechanical equipment on the ground in case some slip in and the boat doesn't collect it. It is a boat with a conveyor belt that grinds this to mulch. And the students did a science project, and they tested 3 different types of manure and sargassum and regular red mold to see which plant would grow the fastest. And the sargassum plant grew the fastest. So it's good for fertilizer. So it can be used in that manner and in agriculture. Turning now to the subject of culture, Mr. Speaker, the ministry was represented at the 26th meeting of the Regional Cultural Committee in Georgetown, Guyana, on the 25th to 26th of June, 2018. Mr. Speaker, this meeting covered several important topics, including leveraging the Caribbean's human, cultural, and natural assets for the economic development of the community, review of the Regional Strategic Plan for Cultural and Entertainment Services, Cultural Industries, the United Nations International Decade for the People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024, financing culture, and the regional calendar of cultural events. Finally, Mr. Speaker, preparations for the 14th Carifesta to be held in August 2019 in Trinidad was discussed at the 13th Carifesta in Barbados, the Cayman Islands. Contingent ably managed by the Cayman National Cultural Foundation did our islands proud. We look forward to hearing of plans for potential representation in 2019. Mr. Speaker, the ministry is also proud that the group at the CARICOM meeting commended the National Culture and Heritage Policy and Strategic Plan for the Cayman Islands, noting its process, format, and content. The ministry looks forward to engaging the key stakeholders once again in the near future to develop the costed operational plan, which will serve to enact the policy over the course of its lifetime. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to note our ministry, we're proud to support artists of what is known as the WICOPA 2018. It's a world championship of the performing arts, which was held in California this year. Namely, Jada Hanna, Rita Estevanovich, and Carly Tibbetts right here from Cayman Brac. They did extremely well in winning one category and going to the semifinals in the other categories. This shows we have immense talents and very talented people here in our 3 Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, the Cayman National Cultural Foundation produced a wonderful event in 2018, Come Back Home. This was an evening of entertainment with the Cayman Islands folk singers and guests, which took audiences back to the heart of Cayman. The Cayman Islands Folk Singers, Mr. Speaker, is a company of amateur singers and musicians formed in 2009, which continues its mission to bring the people of the Cayman Islands folk music works of the highest possible artistic and technical standards. The folk songs and accompanying folk customs serve to present a glimpse into our history and, more importantly, help to provide a framework within which we can continue to define ourselves as a people. The National Museum of the Cayman Islands was very busy also, Mr. Speaker, mounting the 1938 Oxford University biological expedition to the Cayman Islands. I urge honorable members, if you have not yet had the opportunity to see this exhibit, please do make the effort to do so before it comes down in November this year. The expedition, Mr. Speaker, was the first natural history survey of all 3 islands, Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, and Cayman Brac. And reports were written about the flora, fauna, the geology, and wetlands. The founding study of Cayman's butterflies was done by then entomologists, both Oxford students, and gave a good indication of the number of species on each island at that time. Mr. Speaker, the National Museum always has something new and engaging for the people of the Cayman Islands and our visitors. Mr. Speaker, likewise, the National National Gallery of the Cayman Islands recently opened an exhibition featuring collections by Caymanian fashion designers, Izzy B. and Jawara Lean. The designers were given free rein to interpret the artistic history of the Cayman Islands, from early intuitive art by Miss Gladwin, Miss Lasha Bush, and Mr. Charles Long, through the emergence of the native sons and on to the critically engaged contemporary art that is being practiced today. This exhibition, Mr. Speaker, seeks to support the growing fashion industry in the Cayman Islands and to illustrate how the national art collections continue to inspire the creative process. Mr. Speaker, I am especially proud to note that up-and-coming Caymanian artist Simon Tatum assisted with the curatorial duties for this exhibition. Mr. Speaker, on to housing. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I'm very proud to say that the first physical project of this term and of this government will be one of the National Housing Development Trust. I'd also like to provide the members of this honorable House with an update on the progress and work of the National Housing Development Trust. Mr. Speaker, the NHDT continues to adopt cost-saving measures and maintains the practice of seeking value for money. With all its operational responsibilities, including upgrading its computer equipment, procurement of property, insurance, procurement of hurricane shutters for its homes, reviewing house plans and bills of quantities, and employing the media to promote its ongoing developments with a view to selling the newly constructed NHDT homes as soon as they're built. The NHDT's new Affordable Housing Initiative is a program that provides affordable housing to Caymanians between 2010 and 2013. Now, Mr. Speaker, I really don't want to brag, but I'll do it anyhow. Because I don't know what it is, but every time I get elected, houses are built. And and in Bordentown. In Bordentown East. The NHD constructed 94 homes in the district of East End, Bordentown, Georgetown, and West Bay, collaborative. Of these 94 homes, 62 have been sold, 18 are leased to own, 13 homes are being rented, and 1 home is under testament. Mr. Speaker, the NHDT has also recently completed 16 more affordable homes in Bordentown. These 16 homes are contracted to 8 small to medium-sized building Caymanian contractors, with each contractor being required to build 2 homes, Mr. Speaker, 2 homes each. I take great pleasure to inform yourself and the other members of this House that all of the 16 homes have been completed within budget and on time. So despite the note from the honorable member from Bordentown West that the government can't complete any projects within budget, I dare to differ. The initial contracted sum for the 16 homes was 1.815. During construction, for a few change orders were necessary, which totaled only $27,755. The total completed contracted sum for the 16 homes is now 1.842755, which only shows a 1.5% increase of the initial contracted price. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if it's because I tell all my managers and department heads that I hate to hear about overrun. Yeah. So I said, come to me right. So far, we have only paid out $1,747,958, which represents 95% of the contract sum. We are holding back $94,845 from the contractors as a 5% retention fee over a 6-month period. Mr. Speaker, so far 14 of the 16 homes have received the certificate of occupancy from the planning department, and for the 2 remaining, we expect to receive them very soon. These homes have been constructed with concrete block and no sheet rock. Mr. Speaker, no sheet rock has been used. They are strong as a rock, just like the bluff. And I'm reminded that they're not made out of tin foil from Cuba either. And we learn as we go. We learn as we go. All of these 16 homes have been allocated to Affordable Housing Initiative applicants who are seeking financing from their bank. And approximately 60% of those have been pre-approved and in the process of finalizing their mortgage agreements for the purchase of their new home. The successful development of the Bordentown project, Mr. Speaker, has sparked interest and the attraction of new applicants to pursue their dream of home ownership. And an NHD has begun plans for further development within the NHD's 6 other affordable housing sites in Grand Cayman. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that, as the members of this Honourable House will recall, some 107 affordable homes are also built in 2004 before Hurricane Ivan. Many of these old homes have been demolished. Approximately 20 of these old homes that remain in Birch Street Lane in West Bay are not fit for occupancy and also need to be demolished. The NHD has recently been tasked with formulating a plan to address the housing needs of the tenants that remain in these 20 homes and submit that plan to the Ministry once completed. Mr. Speaker, under the Government Guaranteed Home Assisted Mortgage Program, the NHD continues to provide administrative services to families to achieve more ownership by providing a guarantee for a deposit up to 35% of the mortgage. To date, approximately 325 families have benefited from this program, which have been in 2007, began in 2007, and which committed government to a contingent liability of $18 million. Of those families that began the GGHAM program, approximately 125 have been released from the program to date. The Ministry of Housing, the NHD, and the Ministry of Finance continues our negotiations with the banks with a view to successfully relaunch the GGHAM program very soon. There is continued demand for the GGHAM program, Mr. Speaker. Caymanian homeowners like it, the banks like it, and the government loves it. Mr. Speaker, it is very important, and I am glad that I got the support of this government, this coalition government, and that they also enjoy my thoughts that every Caymanian should have an opportunity to own a piece of this rock. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank all the members of the Board of Directors and the staff at the NHD for all the hard work and dedication to the work of the Trust. I want them to know that the government appreciates all that they try to do to improve the lives of our fellow Caymanians. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you this is a very hard-working board. They work every day tirelessly. It's a good board. We have a good chairman, Mr. Powell, and he runs a tight ship, and he understands the business of building, and he appreciates our vision in terms of trying to find affordable homes for Caymanians. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, the government is currently making additional changes to the regulations, to the law, so that these affordable houses can become even more affordable. The Premier, the Honourable Premier, and the Minister of Finance finalizing the details on this, and will be provided later on. Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me this opportunity to update the members of this Honourable House on the work of my ministry. We have a number of ongoing projects and initiatives, and we look forward to providing further updates at the next sitting of this Honourable House. And Mr. Speaker, just with some levity, I want to say that this is not the only thing I'm working on. There's a lot of other stuff in Borden Town East, and we'll announce those later. Thank you. God bless.
The member from Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick couple of questions on the standing order 30-2.
You may.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Minister in regards to the initiative on the iguanas. And I would like to ask if your Department of Environment would please give consideration to have discussions with Mr. Ralph Manu Singh, who has extensive knowledge of culling iguanas at an early age. And I know the Minister is familiar with some of the things that he has shared with us, and I was grateful when he met with this. The other quick question, I note that you're planning under culture on page 17, the cost and operational plan. I would ask Mr. Minister through the Honorable Speaker, to remember to give some consideration to Nurse Joseph's Senior Center, which has the largest collection of culture and heritage in the Cayman Islands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member, you wish to reply?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member from Savannah for those questions. And as he will note, I take great interest into. I've also had a presentation just a week ago from Mr. Ralph Manasingh. I did not even know he existed and doing what he was doing out there. I thank him for coming forward. I thank him for reaching out to me and giving me a presentation. It's the most comprehensive presentation that I've had thus far in terms of culling the iguana, trying to understand the iguana, actually recording them and recording details that the DOE is even interested in having some of his work. And we need to ensure that anything that we do in terms of a culling process and the way forward, that he's included somewhat in it, because he has the most data right now in terms of how to cull an iguana, the habits, the laying of eggs, and he has the most knowledge right now in the Cayman Islands that I've seen. And I thank him for his presentation. I want to say that publicly. Also, the Nurse Joseph's Senior Center, I've actually met with Ms. Teresa Echeneke, and after a meeting with the team at Nurse Joseph's, and we're moving forward and trying to get some funding for this very worthy project, and not only just funding, but I think that this property deserves to be a place that visitors are there on a daily basis. And we'll try to get Deputy Premier in the tourism sector, which also is aware of the project and the product that they're offering there. And it's just too worthy of a project, and to be unnoticed and not cared for to the highest degree. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And anything that I can do, I've already offered them some suggestions from the Minister of Culture. And the thing about it is that the property apparently is under 3 different ministries or something. So I met with Ms. Teresa trying to rein that in under one area. So eventually that will happen so that funding can be directed to it on an annual basis, not only on a one-off. So we're planning some other events that will help shine the light on this beautiful project in the Cayman Islands, the first capital, and one of the areas that actually the first natives of the Cayman Islands actually landed in these areas. And we must take great pride in trying to shine the light on our history and culture of the Cayman Islands, and this is one way of doing it, in my opinion. Thank you.
The member from Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just on section 30-2, can the ministers confirm to this honorable house that the contractors used to build the houses in Bordentown were in fact more like small contractors? Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I want to thank the member from the honorable member from Bordentown West for that question. All of the houses were built by small contractors, which proves that they can actually do the job. And they're all wonderfully built. They're actually inspected by the NHD on a weekly basis. And all have done a great job. Some are young Caymanian contractors. Very proud of the team there. Very experienced contractors are also there to help the others along the way. And I thank you for that question, member from Bordentown West.
Member from West Bay North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Standing Order 30, subsection 2. Question to the Minister. The culling of the iguanas has there been any thought given to opening this up to anybody who's Caymanian to catch these iguanas and bring them in instead of keeping it closed to a chosen few? This way, a lot of young people in Cayman don't need a gun or anything to catch an iguana. And to just, it's a simple thing. If you're a Caymanian, you can bring in the iguanas and get paid for them instead of choose few. A lot of young people could do with the work. And I'm talking about ladies as well that I know would be glad to go out and in daytime, and that way you get everyone going after the iguanas. Any thought been given to this, sir? Please. Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for West Bay North for that question. It's so timely because the government has been given many presentations as to how they think that we should attack this problem, this vexing problem, to cull the iguana. And the government is not quite happy as yet with all the presentations that have been done, and we're looking towards DOE and the other teams to come up with some new ideas as to how we can achieve this in a cost-effective manner and a practical manner. And just that of what the member from West Bay North has said is what the government is trying to achieve, where everyone has an opportunity, especially if government is outlaying the capital to have this project done. Thank you.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise under Standing Orders 32. One quick follow-up that came off of the back of the member from Bontown East. No, Bontown West, I apologize. In respect to the houses, national houses that are being built, I understand they're being built by small contractors, and I congratulate the minister in that respect. Can the minister say if those contractors are from the location upon which the houses are being built? And
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and thank the member from Georgetown Central for that question. It is a competitive process and bidding process and procurement, and what the member is saying is what we try to achieve in terms of giving persons that qualify from those areas that the houses are being built in opportunities to be winners of the awarded those contracts. But it is a competitive process. And I must tell the member also that we are working very hard and very close to finding a new site in Georgetown, which persons from Georgetown have been crying out for opportunities to be able to benefit from additional affordable housing. I think the last is July Street, I think, possibly, that my colleague, the Honorable Councillor, Ms. Barbara Connolly, so admirably handles. So we are on our way, and we have identified a piece of property which we're in negotiations trying to, we've made a bid, we put a bid out, and hopefully we're successful in achieving that property so that we can get on with the business of building houses in Georgetown. Thank you.
He won't know. Next item, please. I have a statement from the Honorable Minister of Financial Services and Home Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to apprise this Honourable House of some of the work of the Ministry for Home Affairs and the relevant departments, the work that's been done to strengthen resilience of the country in the event of and in response to, if necessary, natural disasters or other critical incidents. And today, Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to provide an update of the work of the Ministry to address another important policy objective of the government. Mr. Speaker, members will be aware that one of the key strategic objectives of this government administration is the reduction of crime and the reduction in the fear of crime. And Mr. Speaker, in doing its part to help to achieve this objective, the Ministry responsible for Home Affairs and the relevant departments thereunder continue to prioritize its work in this area. Mr. Speaker, efforts over the last 2 months in particular have been twofold. First, in terms of building capacity, and second, in terms of enhancing programs. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity once again to thank all members of this Honourable House in agreeing to the increased budget allocation for the key departments which are responsible for helping to achieve the goal that I've outlined just now. Turning specifically to Her Majesty's Cayman Islands Prison Services, Mr. Speaker, within the last year, Her Majesty's Cayman Islands Prison Service has made great strides in its efforts to build capacity. Recently, it graduated its newest group of 22 recruits, the largest recruitment class to ever join its ranks. Selected from a pool of 338 other applicants, the 18 men and 4 women began intensive training that extended over 12 weeks and included a competency building in the classroom and on-the-job application. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I am reliably informed that the recruits range in age from 21 to 44 and come from diverse backgrounds, including the legal profession, law enforcement, the military, as well as education and vocational training. Mr. Speaker, members of the group successfully passed rigorous recruitment assessments, including literacy and numeracy tests, a fitness test, and an intensive interview panel. Mr. Speaker, I have also been reliably informed that the recruits completed their classroom-based learning, which covered theory and practical application of prison craft, and completed a 4-week on-the-job training course, which required them to work in the prison, shadowing seasoned prison officers. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the primary purposes of really pushing for this increased capacity at the prison service is that it will better allow for a variety of rehabilitation programs to be developed and offered to the inmates at Her Majesty's Prison Service. And so to this end, Mr. Speaker, one of the flagship initiatives of the prison service is the Fresh Start program, which is a partnership program involving the prison service and several private sector companies, including the Phoenix Group, Clan Construction Limited, and Encompass Cayman. Mr. Speaker, this initiative engages serving prisoners with these key community partners as part of their preparation for release. Mr. Speaker, this program has shown to be extremely successful. All of the prisoners who have engaged with this program and who have substantially, or I should say, who have subsequently been released from prison have been able to sustain jobs. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, 5 ex-prisoners are still employed by the Fresh Start partners themselves. The prison service will seek to extend the range of partnerships with community-based employers so that those in custody can be exposed to real work training and skills development opportunities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, most recently, a new partnership has been solidified, I should say, between Her Majesty's Cayman Islands Prison Service and the National Roads Authority, as was announced recently in the news. The recently established agreement between the prison service and the NRA will provide the prison community work party participants community service opportunities by working with the NRA to pick up debris ahead of the scheduled road maintenance. Mr. Speaker, the collaborative efforts aim to effectively and efficiently keep local roadways clean and safe for all members of the public. And I'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank the Minister for Infrastructure, the Ministry as well, for their support of this program. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Community Rehabilitation has also recently gone through a recruitment process to fill 5 newly funded posts, that being 3 probation officers, a community service coordinator, and an executive officer. In early 2019, Mr. Speaker, the department expects to fill an additional 3 posts, that being 2 additional probation officers and an assistant business manager. Mr. Speaker, these new posts will give the department the human capital necessary to drive services forward, such as the intensive supervision of high-risk offenders, gender-specific services for female offenders, and the enhanced community payback program. Mr. Speaker, this much-needed growth, the department, or I should say with this much-needed growth, the department has been reviewing and streamlining business processes to improve efficiency. The Department of Community Rehabilitation staff is central to the success of its business plan, which was formally developed during the course of the year, and they have implemented a standardized and comprehensive training program for new staff. Plans are in place, Mr. Speaker, for evidence-based training of probation officers on effective community supervision strategies to take place in November of this year. This training will guide the way forward on improved and effective supervision strategies with the goal of reducing offending behaviors in the persons that the department supervises in the community, thus providing overall public safety or efforts to increase such. In terms of programs, Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of the year, the Department of Community Rehabilitation has held several female-specific workshops offered both in the community and at Fairbanks. The remainder of 2018 and into 2019, Mr. Speaker, will focus on the utilizing of increased capacity to enhance public safety by prioritizing the high-risk individuals who require intensive supervision. Mr. Speaker, the government's strategic priority of reducing the fear of crime will be supported by the Department of Community Rehabilitation's efforts to enhance public awareness on the efforts being made within the criminal justice system to collaborate effectively to enhance offender management. Turning now to the National CCTV program, Mr. Speaker, members will be aware that Phase 1 of the National CCTV program began in May 2010 with approximately 170 cameras installed in Grand Cayman. Additional cameras were installed in Grand Cayman between 2012 and 2016, bringing the total number in Grand Cayman to 287 at 100 locations, with the majority being installed at the time during 2012. During the calendar year 2017, there were 277 requests for recorded images from the National CCTV program, and the RCIPS was the main requester. Mr. Speaker, I've been informed that 60% of those requests for CCTV images are associated with active investigations, have resulted in an offender being arrested, bailed, and assisted in obtaining sentencing results. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Public Safety Communications recently committed to adding 12 cameras in the eastern districts. 4 locations with 3 cameras each have been identified, and the planning, design, and staging processes have begun. Camera installations are expected in the 3rd quarter of 2018. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Public Safety Communications, in conjunction with the team at the Central Procurement Office, has begun a new competitive RFP process for the planned upgrade of the National CCTV system head-end hardware in 2018 and 2019. which is critical to support the continued operation and expansion of the program, Mr. Speaker. The CCTV administrator is reviewing the draft RFP along with the team, and the plan is to have the tender issued by mid-September. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the planned national CCTV system head-end upgrade I just spoke about, the national CCTV program expects to have the majority of the remaining older and poor quality images producing cameras upgraded by early October of this year. Several key existing camera locations have already been upgraded, Mr. Speaker, on the recommendations of the public safety partners using the system. So, Mr. Speaker, as should be clear from this brief update on Home Affairs activities, the ministry and its agencies continue to make great strides in delivering on the government's public safety objectives. Mr. Speaker, members of this Honourable House can look forward to further developments this year, and more details will be released through various media programs and in this Honourable House as and when these programs come on stream. Thank you.
Elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on standing order 32 to ask 2 supplementary questions.
Brief questions, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister read in her statement that recently it graduated its newest group of 22 recruits and the largest recruitment class to ever join the ranks. Can she say how many of the 22 recruits were Caymanian?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for that question. I do not have the details of the recruit class and the process, and again, not to reiterate the obvious separation of powers that were explained about the process, so I would have to get that information, and I'd be happy to provide to the member at a later time.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last supplementary question. It is my understanding that the prison is at capacity, and if I am incorrect in that understanding, I'll withdraw the question. But if I am correct, is the minister making any arrangements currently right now or planned to address the capacity issue of persons incarcerated in the Cayman Islands?
Honourable Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I again thank the member for that question, and as the member may be aware, there was a recent press release on this same topic. I don't unfortunately have the text of that with me to be able to kind of give the specifics that were outlined, but there have been discussions ongoing led primarily by the Director of Prisons and the Prison Service to try to find suitable arrangements to address both from a short, medium, and long-term perspective. So it certainly is an area that the government is aware of and looking to make, and already starting to make efforts. There's some development efforts being done at the detention center and otherwise. So again, I don't want to speak out of turn and try to give specifics at this point, but I'm happy to provide those details. Well, the capacity issue is definitely a real one, and it's something that we are trying to make sure that we try to address in a way that deals with immediate, medium, as well as long-term solutions.
The Honourable Member from Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick one on the standing order 30-2. My frequent question in regards to CCTVs in the school areas specifically, especially for the speeders, which I continue to watch in my district and other districts where the primary schools are specifically, that I think it would make a big difference, maybe working in collaboration with your other ministers and departments. I ask that you please give it consideration.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also want to thank the member from Savannah for his request, I should say, and certainly I will have discussions with the director of the program to see if it is something that we can look at enhancing in the the ongoing improvement efforts of the CCTV program, the national program in general.
The member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the minister can tell us if there are any plans to install more cameras than over the next few years because of the value of these cameras. I note that England just this week announced they have identified people who did the poisoning months ago and traced them through cameras. And I know that the age-old problem about encroaching on people's privacy and that kind of stuff, but I wonder if we're going to have a phased thing to put in much more cameras to keep track of deviant behavior in the country.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from East End for that question, and just to again reiterate what was said in the statement about the already efforts being taken to add 12 additional cameras, specifically in the eastern districts, and that having 4 locations with 3 cameras each have already been identified, and the planning and design phase is already undergoing. And I would expect, Mr. Speaker, that this is a program that we would look to continue to enhance and roll out in other areas as needed, and certainly, look forward to bringing further updates to this honourable House as and when the CCTV program continues to evolve nationwide.
Next item, please.
Personal explanations?
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches?
None.
Raising of matter of privileges?
None.
Government business? Bills? Second readings. The Anti-Corruption Amendment Bill 2018.
Where's the order? Just a minute. I'm just trying to get that. Yeah. Thank you, the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was looking forward to begin my presentation by saying that the worst time to speak is after lunch when tummies are full and minds are drifting. But instead, we might just say just before lunch, when tummies are empty and concentration is lapsing. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Anti-Corruption Amendment Bill 2018, the long title, which is a bill for a law to amend the Anti-Corruption Law 2018 revision to provide for the use of protective equipment by investigating officers and for incidental and connected purposes.
The bill has been duly moved. Honorable Attorney General speaking there too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill, as it says, seeks to amend the anti-corruption law to include enabling provisions for the investigators of the commission, Mr. Speaker, to be able to carry certain protective gears when involved in certain operations. Mr. Speaker, as honorable members are aware, following an earlier amendment to the anti-corruption law, that agency now employs their own investigators instead of relying on members of the RCIP to do so. Although, Mr. Speaker, there's still the facility for the police to work along with the anti-corruption team in certain circumstances, especially if there's some joint operations that is required. However, Mr. Speaker, for operational independence purposes, the ACC generally conduct their own investigations. Mr. Speaker, as employees of the government, the government has a positive obligation to ensure the health and safety of the officers whenever they are acting in the course of their duties. Accordingly, sir, like police officers, like customs officers, like immigration officers, and like national conservation officers, the Anti-Corruption Commission investigators would be authorized to carry certain protective equipment if the bill is passed into law, Mr. Speaker, so that they would be afforded certain degree of protection when carrying out some operations. And so, sir, as the bill provides, the governor may give written approval to the chair of the Anti-Corruption Commission to permit the investigating officers to carry handcuffs, tasers, pepper sprays, and batons, as well as to wear certain body armor or protective vests to prevent being stabbed, pierced, or otherwise injured by certain objects, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that the list of equipment in the bill does not include firearms. But it is anticipated that if that level of force is contemplated, then the RCIP would be co-opted to mount joint operation with the Anti-Corruption Commission officers. Mr. Speaker, in issuing the approval to the officers, the chair of the Anti-Corruption Commission would include necessary conditions for their deployment. We are also advised, Mr. Speaker, that understandably, the officers have received and will continue to receive the necessary training facilitated by the RCIP in the use and possession of these equipment. And of course, Mr. Speaker, there will be protocols for oversight and reporting on the use thereof, including, Mr. Speaker, a report to the Commissioner of Police of the names of those officers who have been issued with this protective equipment. So, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before, the government has a positive obligation to ensure the safety of these officers when acting in the course of their duties, and that obligation will be met, Mr. Speaker, in large part if this bill is passed into law. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would wish to commend this bill to honorable members of this House and seek their support for its passage into law. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't think that there is much to argue against, other than there may be some questions that needs to be asked here. I know there was a time when we gave the certain members of Customs and Immigration, that task force, certain privileges to carry defensive means in their carrying out of their duties. However, those were instances where, and those are instances where they're interacting with, during border control, with what could potentially be dangerous people, smugglers, the likes. In this case, it was my understanding that the staff of the anti-corruption were merely to investigate complaints. And I have not heard, nor has anyone else here heard of any instances of threatening violence towards these members of staff. And if there is, I would respectfully ask that the Attorney General give us some explanation, not necessarily the specific instance, but some explanation as to whether or not that is what prompted us to now give these members of staff protective means to carry some means of protecting their lives. I wonder also where the staff is hired from to be anti-corruption officers, investigative officers. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General said that the police will be cooperative for whenever there's need for guns to be deployed. I can see that being quite a serious situation to have to deploy the police, because the police only display of guns happens to be from the task force, uniform task force, I believe. So when it has reached that stage that the police has to be co-opted, we are talking about serious intervention. And certainly I think we deserve to know what would prompt such. And that the police would also be required to do the training. And I'm wondering if it's training for all of the officers, or is this only going to be, this protective equipment only going to be deployed to certain officers within the anti-corruption department? Or is it going to be given straight across the board to these officers? Keeping in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the initial question was, where are we hiring them from? Whether it's the police force or from the private sector, because I would suspect some are doing financial investigation and has not been exposed to armed forces in their prior life, in their prior profession. So how many are being trained? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General went to great lengths to let us know that, point out that no guns were involved in this protective equipment as per this amendment. However, I wonder if the Attorney General can explain to us in Section 2 of this amendment, where it defines the definition of protective equipment. It says it includes batons, handcuffs, and other means of restraints, body armor, tasers, and pepper spray. The question is, what is defined as other means of restraints? Because, as I know it now, the cheap way of restraining people are handcuffs made of tie wraps. Not a cheap way, but you can carry more of those than you can carry the original issue handcuffs, which are stainless steel, I believe. But, so it's a more effective way of restraining more than one person or a crowd of people. So it certainly would not mean those. And since the police would be deployed, co-opted, when there's a requirement for guns, what are these other means of restraints? When all of the ones, the traditional ones, are listed individually. It seems quite broad to say other means of restraints, because that can be, in my view, interpreted to mean guns too. If you stretch it, it could mean that. I haven't looked at the police law to look at the interpretation of, I think, the criminal law as well, the interpretation of guns. I do know it talks about cartridges and the leg and vest and so on. But this other means of restraints seems a little broad to me when the Attorney General has gone to great lengths to ensure that guns were not included in the definition, and this could be interpreted, unless he has some other legal interpretation of other means of restraint. I can think of a few: your fist, cow cod, rope. There are a number of other means you can restrain people. Now, can it be said, or is it legal for those other means of restraint to be used? I can think of 2x4 as another means of restraint. That'll restrain them too. There are many means. So I'm wondering if there's any need for that to be there, or are we giving them that much latitude that they can use anything they wish? Because if you have batons, handcuffs, body armor, taser, and pepper spray, and it may be all those things are being used and you can't restrain them, I don't know what else would be reasonable and not considered unreasonable force other than a firearm. So if the Attorney General could explain that, then I think we would be okay with granting his wish to support his proposals to amend the anti-corruption law. So, Mr. Speaker, I shall wait his response.
Speaker,
just relax. Relax.
At this time, we're going to break for lunch, and we should come back. Before we do that, the Honorable Deputy Premier has asked for an intervention.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just a quick invitation to all members of this Honorable House. As you know, this is the 50th anniversary of Cayman Airways, and Saturday evening, the past employees and the present employees will be having a party recognizing their service, and I want to make sure that everyone knows that they're invited. It's at the Grand Pavilion poolside, and it starts at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you. I crave your indulgence. I want to just see if I can take a quick opportunity to thank the people of Cayman Brac, because I know that when we come back, we're going to be going on for a while, and maybe there may not be some people in the
Honorable Member, let us go get something to eat, please. Do that when you come back. You shall have that right. We will suspend proceedings until 2:45, 3 o'clock.